Hi there guys, got another video here for you today on the Anschutz 9015, and what we're going to be doing in this one is making a quick fill system for it. So we mentioned in the previous video that my only real problem with the rifle is that the cylinder has to be taken off the rifle in order to be filled. Taking the cylinder off the rifle isn't ideal, especially when you're set up for bench rest, so what we're going to be doing is making a little something to solve that problem. Essentially what we're going to have is a gauge on the side of the fitting and a Foster fitting in the end, so that we can connect that to our whip on the bottle. You'll see what I mean as the project progresses, but first, as always, we've got some just rough stock chucked up in the lathe and we're facing and turning it down to 32mm. Next, using the standard gauge as a template, what we're doing is copying all the features from the gauge onto the end of the quick fill. And starting with the largest ID, we're turning the shoulder down to 28mm first, and at a later date we'll put a thread on this. And the next are some relief cuts to allow the fitting to screw into the tube nice and easily. And finally, we've got an O-ring groove that needs to be cut. So the seal that this particular rifle uses isn't an O-ring, it's more of a square-sided O-ring. But the actual groove itself is cut no different than a standard O-ring. The only real difference is that the seal is a slightly different shape. But once the profile of the part's done, we can go around with a 45-degree chamfer tool and just put a small chamfer on all the edges, and also a nice lead onto the thread. So the thread we're going to be cutting in this instance is a 28 by 1mm thread. So 28mm OD with a 1mm pitch, and we're going to be using a full form insert for this. So we're going to be cutting both the root and the crest of the threads, or the top and the bottom edge of the threads. These tools are really nice and easy, as they cut both the top and the bottom of the thread. All you need to do is measure the OD of the thread that you're cutting, and once you get it to the correct diameter, you know you've hit full depth on the thread itself. But once that's all cut, we can check the fit on the cylinder itself, and we managed to get a very nice fit indeed. As it's a pressure vessel, you really want a nice tight thread, and you definitely don't want a very loose fit. Once that end's done, we can part it off from the stock and start work on the other end. This will be the cap end and the end that the Foster fitting connects to, and we're going to be putting a screw-on cap to this. So first thing to do is just to face it to length, then start turning it down for the cap itself. We're going to be having a threaded cap on this end, so I'm just turning it down to 20mm so that we can put a 20 by 1mm thread on there. And to thread it, again we're using the same full form insert, so it's really nice and easy to thread. Next up is to drill the hole for the Foster fitting. We're using an off-the-shelf Foster fitting, and the thread on the end of it is M12 by 1. So we're drilling it out to 10mm first, then coming through with a boring bar, boring it out to 11mm and creating a nice flat bottom. Using the same boring bar, we're going to be creating a face groove for an O-ring, and the O-ring will seal on the back of the Foster fitting. In this case we're using a 13.5 by 1mm O-ring, so the OD of the face groove would be 15.5 and the depth would be around 0.7mm. This will give a 0.3mm squeeze on that O-ring, and that will seal it up nicely. The Foster fitting we're using does have a one-way valve fitted to it, and that will just stop air leaking out the end of the Foster fitting once the cylinder has been filled. Finally, for the lathe work, we can just tap the end M12 by 1. Now, as I said before, we're going to be having a gauge fitted to the side of this unit, so the next job was to fit it onto the cylinder, install it in the rifle and mark the side that we wanted the gauge on. So I'm right-handed and we're going to be having the gauge on the left-hand side so I can read it nice and easily. So once the location was marked, we could transfer the part over to the mill and start milling out the side for the gauge. We're milling a flat on the side of this unit just to stop the gauge from sticking out too far and to create a nice sealing surface for the doughty washer. And obviously a doughty washer won't seal on a round profile. But once the flat's milled, we drill through with a 2mm drill bit, and this will be the breakthrough hole for the gauge, and then we follow that up with a 8.6mm drill bit for a 1/8 BSP tap. Again, just using an end mill to bottom out the hole nicely. Then we just chamfer it and tap it 1/8 BSP. Finally, for this part, using a parallel on the flat face, we can set it upright in the mill and just drill a hole through the entire length of the part. This will be the hole that the air travels through into the cylinder, and it will also connect with the 2mm hole we drilled earlier for the gauge reading. Next up is the end cap, and the first thing we did was prepared some stock, turning a spigot down on one end so that we can hold it securely in both the lathe and the mill. Once we've got it held by the spigot, we can face it and turn it down to diameter, and finally put in a nice deep 45 chamfer on the end. Once that's done, we can transfer the part over to the mill, holding it by the spigot, and on this piece what we're doing is using a ball end mill, creating some decorative features around the OD of the part. After that we can finish the features off with a nice deep chamfer. Once all the decorative features were done, it was just a case of parting the end cap off on the lathe, flipping it round and boring out the back to accept a 20x1mm thread. I didn't show much of the boring or the threading, as we've already covered quite a bit of this in this video, but all we needed to do was bore the back of the end cap out to 19mm, set the lathe up for threading and put a 20x1 thread in there, using the quick fill adapter as a gauge for the threads. Right then, so you just saw us make these two parts here, and what I've done is I've laid out all the parts that are going to go into the quick fill and we're going to put it together. Firstly though, I did remove the gauge from the end of the cylinder. So here's the standard Anschutz gauge that the rifle comes with. That's normally screwed in there. We obviously had to remove it to fit our quick fill. What I did to do that was actually clamp the gauge in a vise, my mill vise, which has nice flat sides, so the gauge is hexed, so I clamped it in the side there like so, and then undone the cylinder by getting a 30mm socket or a 30mm spanner on this end and cracking it loose. It was fairly tight, but doing it that way just saved any damage to anything, and luckily it came out nice and easily. Before that though, you do have to obviously degas the cylinder. Luckily Anschutz do give you a degassing tool in the kit, so this just screws on this end here and just presses on the fitting in the end here and releases the air. So with that all out of the way, what we'll do now is we'll put it all together and test it. So first thing we're going to do, get this seal here, just put a small amount of silicone grease around the seal just so it doesn't catch as we install it. That's going to go around this part here, like so. Next up we'll put the one-way valve in the Foster fitting. So this is just a commercially available item, just from China. I think I got this from AliExpress. One problem with it though, I did have an issue when testing this device on this part here. So this isn't the standard O-ring that this setup comes with, this is a new one, as the one that it came with failed when we tested it down range. A bit annoying to be honest, but luckily one of the people at the range, one of my friends, had spare O-rings that fitted on nicely. But so the one-way valve goes in there like so, and then this threaded cap goes on the end. So the way this little device works is that the plunger with the O-ring in is being pushed by spring tension and by cylinder pressure against the sealing face, and when we fill it from this direction, the air flowing in this direction de-seats the O-ring or pushes it off the seat and allows air to pass around it. Then when we stop filling it, the air from this side pushes the O-ring back into its seat and seals it. So air is able to go this way, but not able to go this way. So next up, we'll get our fitting here and place the little O-ring over the top there. Small amount of silicone grease on that. Then we'll do the fitting up and tighten it down with a 15mm spanner, like so. We're going to leave the gauge off for now, as we need it off in order to screw the cylinder onto the rifle, and we'll be leaving the end cap off till the end. Next up, we can put the device in the end of the cylinder, like so, nice and hand tight will do. Once this cylinder is pressurised, there's no chance that you're ever going to be able to undo that, so hand tight is good enough in this application. Next we'll bring the gun over, so here's the Anschutz, and we'll install the cylinder. And lastly, what we can do is install the gauge. So this is just a temporary one that I'm using just for now. It's got FX written on it. I've got one ordered that doesn't have FX branding on it, but for now this is the only one in this size that I've got. But that's sealed with a dirty washer, and we're just going to be doing that up with an adjustable spanner, nice and tight, like so. And there we have it. So we've got the quick fill on the end there with the gauge. We've also got our end cap which can screw on and screw off when we need to fill the rifle. Right then, so I'll get a bottle and we'll get it filled. Right then, so as you can see there, we've got the rifle filled up. We're showing about 200 bar on the gauge there. So we've got about 200 bar of pressure in the cylinder. Nice and easy to fill up now with the Foster fitting on the end there. And another added benefit is that with the gauge moved over to the side, we no longer have to look down the muzzle end of the rifle to check our pressure, which is always a bonus. So the two last things we need to install are just the end cover, like so, and a little gauge cover there. So I like the little white dot on my gauge covers as you can line it up with your minimum field pressure. So in this case I've lined it up with 100 bar, and that just tells us that when this needle gets near this white dot we need to fill up. These little tiny gauges aren't the easiest thing in the world to read, and that visual alignment there just makes it a little easier to see. So this unit isn't 100% finished yet. We do need to anodise it black. I was going to keep it silver to match the barrel, but I think it will look better black, the same as the cylinder, and I may add a little fold out wind flag on the side here, but that'll be coming at a later date. But for now guys, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.